August of 2001, this Mormon high priest abused kids in 7 different cities all over the country for a period of 15 years, and he was known, and what he was doing was known to the highest leadership of the church based in Salt Lake City. And in the course of doing that case, I discovered that there were hundreds of similar kinds of cases where they were not reported to the police. The church had internal documentation of complaints, just like in the Catholic Church. But again, they would hide behind the clergy exemption that exists in our mandatory reporting law and in the mandatory reporting laws of other states as well, and not report it to the police. And so that's why it's so critical, Mark, that the legislature go back and fix these laws so that clergy can't hide behind these legal exceptions that have permitted to not turn these molesters over to police.
Well, Tim, let's ask the question. Excuse me. Let's ask the question right now. Why would we ever exempt the church from not reporting child molestation in their church? It seems bizarre that we would address it and exempt them.
Well, the history of our law in this state is a little curious. When our first mandatory reporting law was passed in 1971, clergy were included. And then in 1975, without any kind of legislative debate, it was deleted from the statute. And there's no legislative history. There doesn't appear to have been any debate. Somehow that got slipped in and passed without any notice or attention. And so since 1975, we've had a law in this state that has basically said, if you're clergy and you hear about abuse, if it's reported to you by a victim, you're under no obligation to report it to the police. You're not a mandatory reporter. Now, there's a bill that's been introduced by Representative Mary Lou Dickerson of Seattle, House Bill 1054, that will eliminate that exemption, but it still provides for communications learned within the confessional to be exempted from the requirement.
Why should that be exempted?
Well,
let's just, I guess, I'm great on hypotheticals, so let's give one. You go to the confessional booth and say, I am planning to assassinate a political figure, and they give the name, the location, and the date. Is that priest supposed to keep that information to himself?
Well, Mark, I would just say that I try, in principle, I agree with you. Practically, perpetrators do not confess to their clergy. That's not how clergy are learning about it. Maybe 1 in 100. So if we can get a bill that does not exempt clergy, I'm not that concerned about information that's obtained in the confessional. It's been a tradition in our culture and in our law for many years, and I'm content to leave it alone. If it means we can get a bill that basically is going to allow us to prosecute and convict clergy who learn about it through third persons, through parents, and so forth, because that's where they're learning about it.
Yeah, it's interesting when you describe this. We all understand what you're saying, but I'm a little stuck on people that are supposedly of the highest moral values in the community needing mandatory reporting. I don't even think we need mandatory reporting. They should do this because of who they are and what they represent. That shows just exactly how corrupt they are.
Well, I'm not going to go there, Mark. I mean, there are a lot of fine people of faith and so forth. But
no, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the people that hold the information that because there's no mandatory reporting, they simply don't do it.
I agree. I think that it's morally indefensible, and it ought to be legally indefensible as well.
I agree with that. We got to take a break, Tim. We're going to come back, and when we come back, for all of you out there, because this is where you can really engage in this conversation, I want to know, in the Jehovah's Witness, especially in Latter-day Saints, what is the situation with the parents discovering? What is the process of uncovering these child abuse? If the child tells the parents and the parents go to church, we've heard it about the Catholic Church in certain instances. I want to know about this. We're going to be right back. Listen to the Mark Furman Show on 920 KXLY.
You have the right to remain silent. Except on this show. Mark Furman is on your radio now.
Welcome back to the show. My guest is Tim Kosnoff. He's an attorney that has represented a lot of victims from various churches. Today we're talking about Jehovah's Witness. I know I have Mike on the line, and hang on there, Mike. I want to ask Tim one question before we go to you. Tim, when we took the break, I asked about parents. In the Jehovah's Witness situation, how do we learn of the child abuse?
Well, children naturally, Mark, are ashamed and they feel guilty, and they, generally speaking, don't report. But those that do disclose to a parent, what I find is a situation, and I've heard this story over and over again, they'll go to the elders in the church. In the case of the Jehovah's Witnesses, when they go to the elders will either insinuate or perhaps more directly intimidate them into not going to the police or otherwise disclosing to anybody else, Child Protective Services. And they intimidate the parents and the children with threats of excommunication from the church, from shunning, and they're told that nothing can be done against the perpetrator because there hasn't been a second witness. And they have.
Is that their policy, Tim, that they need a second witness?
Their doctor
or the perpetrator to admit?
To bring an accusation of any kind against another member, you have to have a witness. And of course, it's absurd in the case of child abuse because children are not abused in the presence of witnesses, generally speaking. And so this kind of religious belief comes, right up against their secular responsibility to report, allegations of child abuse to the police. And so I've heard stories like this, emails. I probably get 15 to 30 hits a week on Jehovah's Witness issues on my website. Bill Bowen of Silent Lambs says that he's spoken with over 5,000 victims within the Jehovah's Witnesses who report the same identical experience. We went to the elders. They threatened us with excommunication and shunning if we told anybody. They said that there's nothing that can be done, that it would be going against God if they said anything further about it. And so I think you begin to get a feel for the kinds of organizations. These tend to be hierarchical, top-down, male-oriented, or male-dominated religious organizations. The power goes from the top down, but the money goes from the bottom up. And within that context, I've had so many clients who've told me things like, Tim, when I was growing up, we never had a non-Mormon in our home, or we never had a non-Jehovah's Witness in our home. We never socialized with anybody who wasn't in our church. Our entire lives were consumed with church and church-related activities. And so the church is able to maintain a kind of control. And for victims to step outside and say, no, you're wrong, I've been hurt, and I've come to you for help, they face the prospect of not only being excommunicated from the only religion they've ever believed in, losing all of their friends, losing their entire social and religious community, being shunned by their own brothers and sisters and mothers and fathers, and it's just too much. But what it does is that it effectively silences these people. And we're only now, because of what's happened, the attention that's been focused on the Catholic Church, beginning to see these people come forward. And I understand that you had an enormous response from your first radio show on that, and it doesn't surprise me a bit.
Well, let's. We have a Jehovah's Witness elder, Mike. He's on the line right now. Welcome to the show, Mike.
Hi.
And now, Mike, you called me last week, and I appreciate your email. I used those websites, and I will I will read another sentence from this very website that you gave me, watchtower.org. Depending on the law of the land where he lives, the molester may well have to serve a prison term or face other sanctions from the state. The congregation will not protect him from this. Sounds like they do, doesn't it, Mike?
Yeah, well, see, that's my point, and that's why I called in last week. First off, I apologize if I sounded confrontational last week.
No, I was confrontational. You were fine, Mike.
Okay, well, I didn't mean to. It was not my intention to be. I just took exception to what I was hearing. And I only caught a few minutes of it, so I didn't hear the whole show. And even what I've heard here just this afternoon, some of what I heard is fine. I don't take any exception with it. But what I just heard is again getting away from what our actual policy is. Our policy is not to protect individuals. The sentence you read, the first sentence you read out of one of the articles that you were reading from, talked about repentance. What it's talking about is whether or not God can forgive an individual. It has nothing to do with our policy in dealing with those who are accused of child abuse. We do not protect child abusers. we don't in any way do that. Now, is that to say that there are some cases throughout